Technology. Okay. Welcome to the Staffing and Urgency Committee on the 20th of September 2021. Agenda, I'm chairing in place of Councillor Ashton as Vice Chair. So I have apologies from Councillor Ashton. Declarations of interest is item 1. Do I have any declarations of interest from members of the committee? Doesn't look like it. I don't have any. Item 2, exclusion of press and public in relation to items 8 and 9. And those are items actually for noting, but when we get to those, I propose we exclude the press and the public. Is everyone happy with doing that for those items?
Chair, can I just ask, obviously no problem with excluding press and public from the individual details, so the amounts of money that are being paid out, but do we not say how many are going to be discussed, so how many redundancies are going to be, how many exit agreements have been made, and in what area they're in, so what part of the council is affected by it? Do we not make that public?
I think, I don't know if Terry, do you want to come respond on that?
So we haven't previously. I think we've always used the generic reports. I've had a discussion prior to this meeting, and I think if that's what the committee would like, some more high-level detail in the public reports to go with the confidential annex, then we can look at improving them for the following reports. If the committee wants
I think in these two cases are one per item, so individual items.
I don't know what I'm asking for is just the headline figures. So how many redundancies are we talking about? What's the total cost of them? What areas are they in? I mean, surely that's information we should be sharing with the public anyway.
Certainly we can note that for future, as a request from yourself. We'll look at that. Thank you. So am I taking it that everyone's happy with excluding press and public for those two items? So then that takes me on to item 3, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, the 16th of August 2021. Are members of the committee happy to approve those minutes? Yeah, okay. So I can sign those. So item 4, public participation, and I believe have a couple of speakers registered. I can't remember which order they're in. Councillor Waters first. Okay. Councillor Waters, do you want to come and address the committee for up to 3 minutes? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking at this meeting to back up a formal complaint I've submitted this afternoon against the Council's monitoring officer and head of legal. I'd like confirmation that this complaint will be dealt with by oversight from this committee. Otherwise, such a complaint will be curated through the system by other officers in the senior officer clique with the inevitable outcome. We seem to have reached a point in this administration whereby any degree of impartiality by some officers and respect to members and other statutory bodies like parish councils outside of the ruling council executive has been completely lost. Having an insular executive system of governance breeds such contempt, but I can never recall things being so bad whereby a fairly senior council officer makes obscene gestures at a meeting in response to an opposition councillor speaking, which to me betrays a deep-rooted cultural attitude amongst senior officers who considered councillors, who unlike many of those officers actually live in the city, as an inconvenience. Can there be a clearer demonstration of such a system in operation as to the so-called standards regime run by the monitoring officer? 2 very serious standards complaints with regard to the council leader involving allegations in relation to the former chief executive departure dismissed out of hand and without reference to standards committee members by the monitoring officer. Whilst the very same officer pursues, in my case, one totally fabricated case all the way to a hearing, which saw the case completely dismissed, and now another ridiculous case the same officer deems worthy of investigation that should have been rejected as soon as it was received, as it's time barred according to the council's own procedures. When the Standards Board for England was swept away in 2011 and local authorities assumed a self-policing role for standards, it was recognised that council monitoring officers had to be impartial. I have no confidence in this officer's impartiality, and judging by the other recent farce, and that's the only word I can use to describe it, of a standards hearing that had to be abandoned, the last full council fiasco, on top of the debacle of annual council, I have concerns of a professional competence as well. Look forward to confirmation of your oversight to my submitted complaint. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your comments, which are noted by the committee. The next speaker I have is Gwen Swinburne.
Thank you, Chair. This committee has, in theory at least, responsibility for disciplinary matters related to statutory and chief officers. Those exact same statutory officers that service this committee, that caused the public interest report, who wrote the public interest report action plan, and who refused to allow councillors to change that plan. No surprise then that the action plan was silent on any disciplinary actions against those same officers. May I ask, as an example, which of the statutory officers or head of HR faced any disciplinary protocols at all for each of their manifest failings that led to the public interest report over the Weastel payoff farrago? Let's not forget, your responsibility for chief officer discipline was brought in by this administration after having to pay off or be forced to promote poor performing top staff, all for the lack of proper HR and committee processes. Despite requests, these same statutory officers have been unable to produce, to me, any committee or other protocols now in place to address their own non-performance. Nothing, don't worry, Chair. One complaint from me regarding a statutory officer trying to silence me in committee resulted in one email saying they had the complaint and I wouldn't hear anything. Much later, saying they had completed the complaint and I wouldn't hear anything, not even if it was upheld or dismissed. Contrast that, if you will, with the extraordinary lengths that the same monitoring officer goes to control the behaviour and conduct of some, but not all members. Councillor Waters has been a particular target for such excesses, not once it seems, but now twice. Both significant overreaches of the monitoring officer's limited delegations. Contrast that with the ease with which she dismissed not one, but two substantive complaints against the leader, using spurious excuses, none of which every member knows stands even a minimal test. Chair, the conduct of the monitoring officer is increasingly bringing this authority and the Standards Committee and this committee into disrepute.
30 seconds.
Thank you, Chair. In view of the escalating seriousness of these matters, and believe me, I wish it had not been necessary, I had no option but to lodge a misconduct in public office complaint against the monitoring officer with North Yorkshire Police, who are processing it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your comments, which will be noted by the committee. I move next to item 5, which is emergency retention protocol, pages 7 to 16.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper, agenda item 5, is the emergency retention protocol that we're putting before committee today. It's in response really to some of the emerging service, some of the critical kind of recruitment issues and skill shortages that are being seen nationally. You'll have all seen on the news some of those around kind of social care, HGV drivers, etc. And our current pay policy doesn't allow us to introduce or pay any of the kind of retention payment. So we're asking Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee to approve this emergency protocol and agree to the development of a retention policy as part of that pay policy. As I've said, it's there in order for us to retain the key skills in the workforce which are under pressure. Obviously, the Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee can choose not to accept the recommendations, and in doing so might result in vacancies in areas leading to pressure on service delivery. So in terms of the rest of the paper, kind of takes you through some of that background. So we have got some emerging issues around children's services and waste. However, by actually agreeing to this protocol doesn't guarantee that those would meet the necessary criteria. So it is dependent, and we can go through some of the legal risks as it's in the paper. We're looking for, so the emergency protocol, we have spoken to the trade unions about this, which are in support of it, and obviously the details around the business case and the sign-off that would be required. Retention policies can be used to address these issues where there is specific situations, and that the formal policy will be produced in conjunction with the trade unions going forward, and we'll do that quite quickly. The conditions then on page 9 from paragraph 13 onwards take you through the conditions that that support the retention payment. So it's about individuals and not jobs. It's about retaining specific employees for their in a particular time frame to mitigate any risk to the council, and it's their skills and abilities and experience that we're trying to retain for that period of time. Paragraph 15, it shows you that criteria. So that the services, so a retention payment will only be made for serious service critical conditions and if the following criteria are met. So the service or experience pay related retention difficulties, assurance is received from the service that other non-pay related management actions have not worked. So obviously we try and do other measures and discussions with individuals before this time. And or leading on to 3 and 4, it's key to the successful delivery of critical time limited project or programme of work. Or the time taken to recruit and induct a new recruit would jeopardise the successful delivery of the project of work. So there's project ones and there's service critical. The business case would need to clearly identify the service critical issue, the plan to resolve it, and the time frame. So that's really important in that business case that that's set out, and that would mitigate then any equal pay risk or some of our legal mitigations. It should also show what other measures have been considered. So this isn't a go-to first instance, this should be a last resort. The service critical situation must be monitored and steps taken to resolve the issue reviewed regularly at CMT and CCMC, which is our joint negotiating committee with the trade unions. The payment details then, so they're not contractual, they could be withdrawn and amended at any time, subject to satisfactory performance. They can't go beyond that 12 months, so it's very time specific, and in that 12 months we should be working on the resolution to the issue. Annual level of payment to be set at 10% of the individual's basic annual salary, and it would be paid normally in 2 6-monthly intervals, so it's paid at 6 months and then paid at 12 months. So it is about that retention. They're not getting it on a monthly basis, it's split across the two intervals across the year. Authorisation through the Chief Officer and Head of Service will be asked a month prior to the 6-month payment of that retention payment. And there's other things that they're not subject to pay protection. It will not count for allowances. It will count for pensionable entitlement. Applications then are made through a business case. It goes to the departmental management team, the corporate management team with financial approval to sit with the head of paid service in section 151. And then it goes to CCNC pay board, which is members of CMT and the trade unions in that. So consultation has taken place with the trade unions and the council's senior employment lawyer, and the implications, the legal implications are listed there for you on page 13. The costs associated with any retention payments will be met by the service area, and expect that will be confirmed on the application by the department's finance manager. There are legal implications around equal pay and discrimination, and that's why it has to be very tight in terms of the business case for that, and the legal risks are listed there for you. So there's quite a number of legal risks. There's also some detail around the risk management with that kind of potential for pay and discrimination issues. So why it's really important that we know that the evidence exists to justify in any of that payment. I think that's it, and unless you've got any, I can take you through any questions if you want me to go through any more of the detail.
Any members of the committee want to ask a question, Councillor Hook?
Yes, I'm a bit worried that this might be a bit of an own goal, because if I was working in a busy department where all the employees were feeling a bit stressed because they've got an awful lot of work due to staff shortages or whatever, and then I found that some colleagues had got this bonus and I hadn't, I would really see it as a criticism of my work, and that would probably be the thing that tips me over with all the stress I've got anyway, and I'd go off sick. And you could end up having lots of people going off sick because they're not getting the bonus. And that's the real worry. And to avoid that, you know, well, I don't know how you would. And so I would prefer it really that you sort of saw what the fair wage was for that, given that there's a new, which I think is a permanent change in staff availability now. You know, Brexit unfortunately has happened and, you know, things are going to be permanent. And I would also be concerned, will it all go just to the very senior people? Because that adds to the costs, and really senior people should be able to bear the extra work, really.
I want to respond to those points.
Yeah, so I suppose if you look at the HGV driver issue that's currently on the national news, etc., and whilst we're monitoring that but kind of daily, really, within the council, that would be applied. So if this policy was in and we felt we needed to retain those lorry drivers and to pay them that, to give them that retention, it would be applied across all the lorry drivers in that instance. I think there's some specific, there may be other areas where that you could have, so I'll use example of maybe a HR manager. I've got 5 HR managers. One of them has lots of experience and knowledge of previous, the kind of 2008 kind of changes around job evaluation, etc. And if we were going into that again and there was a risk that we could lose them, you could potentially apply that retention payment to that one person and not equally across the piece. It's down to individual business cases and the specific detail, and I think the sign-off process and that kind of challenge needs to come through that, knowing the risks and the risks of what you've identified there, Councillor Hook, around the knock-on effect of the staff that are left that may be in the same job but not getting the retention is a serious implication. I don't know what the answer is to that, but
It's very much just human nature, because I've worked in office environments and, you know, if that had happened there, it would have been all sorts of problems. So.
Councillor Eyre, you wanted to
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I
comment on
think
this?
it goes to the heart of that transparency, Trudy, and I think that's my risk around this and where we need to possibly think about it a little bit more, because we know about the HGV situation and we know the private sector have stepped in and made these sort of payments to the HGV drivers to make sure they are staying. I think Morrison's did. I think most of the ones have done that. They have the flexibility as private companies to do that. And yes, I can see the need for this paper about how we go about doing that. But I do take on board what Councillor Hook was saying. And if that's not done in a transparent way so people can see and that narrative is made clear as to why those payments are done, then yes, that will lead to significant issues about people thinking things are happening that probably aren't happening, and people will begin looking at other colleagues across the corridor thinking, are they or are they not getting this payment and I'm not getting this payment. But I do think there is a wider issue, and it's probably not just about this, Councillor Hook, in terms of how you actually look at that. And that is something that has come out of the Brexit pandemic and something we're sort of well aware of those pressures under staff and sort of those competing conversations about, so it's difficult to word it, everybody's having a very difficult time. And we know the social care staff are having a very difficult time. We know our call centre staff are having a very difficult time. And it is dangerous to think that people might start turning on each other in terms of council staff and saying, well, actually, we've got it worse than everybody else. We should be getting this type of thing. It's probably a wider thing than just this, in terms of how we make sure all our staff are valued and all that message is quite clear to them, that they are all integral and really important to what it is that we do, rather than getting this sort of division and infighting about who is more important than others and who should be getting retention payments and who shouldn't, and whose work is more business critical, because we can't do anything without everybody. It's integral cogs in everything, and if we're not paying our staff, then our staff won't be coming into work. So our payroll staff are in many ways just as important as our frontline staff. So it's really getting that message across. And yes, this is the right thing to do, I think, now, in terms of providing that flexibility to enable us to be able to continue to deliver business continuity. But we need to think of that and the whole wider section about how we make sure it's not having a negative impact on staff morale.
Councillor Kilbane.
Can I just ask a couple of basic questions? First one would be, how is it triggered? So, you know, is it triggered when somebody says they want to leave and they happen to work in a specific area where we struggle to recruit across the board? The other question is, I'm assuming they get it, you know, sort of the payment is made after they've signed some sort of an agreement to stay for 6 months. It's paid at the end of that 6 months. I don't know if that's right or not. And the other question is, how are we going to gender monitor it during the duration of the pilot? Because you could very easily see that most of the payments end up going to male-dominated workplaces.
Yeah, so in relation to how is it triggered, I suppose it depends on the circumstances at the time and what's happening. It might be that there's been a high turnover and that for example, if the first 3 people leave in a team, that was fine. We've struggled to recruit. If you're getting on to the 4th person, well, actually the significant impact of the service delivery of that 4th person leaving might go, actually, we don't want them to leave. We don't want to be in a position where they're looking for the work. We need to retain their skills for the next 12 months while we recruit and fill those vacancies. So I suppose there isn't an easy answer, Councillor Kilburn, to how is it triggered, because it's different circumstances.
So it doesn't take somebody saying, I'm looking for another job, or I'm giving you my notice. It's an assessment made of the department by the managers in that department if they think that they're in threat of losing staff that are going to be difficult to replace.
Yeah, so it's not just somebody, what it won't be used for is somebody playing the system and go, well, actually, I can get 10% here if I decide to say I'm leaving. So that's not the intention of it. So it wouldn't be triggered by that. It would be an assessment of the situation at the time. And ideally, managers should be monitoring where their service is critical and if they're having these pressures. So actually, we haven't got the person, that 4th person shouldn't be looking to leave, for example, because the managers should be able to use this, assess it and go, actually, we need to retain you for the next 12 months. Don't go looking for work. It's that assessment.
To follow that line of comment, just is this a process that if it's approved today, that there'll be a sort of like a review across the whole authority to look at where this might apply, or is it going to be just down to whichever line manager gets in first with the applications, you know, to use this new policy?
Yes, so it's not going to be this is a new policy, who wants it? It is, but so we're aware of some of the unique situations that are currently in children's and in the drivers, but they'd need to go through that application process for us to assess the legal risks around what that would mean for the council in applying it. So it's not a look at this, it's there to be used as part of the pay. So we have market supplements and things as part of the pay policy. They're not widely used. In terms of monitoring, and going back to Councillor Kilburn's point, it would be monitored through the CCNC pay board. So we get data there on every 3 months, quarterly, around who's in receipts of any of the additional payments linked to the pay policy and the gender details around that, so that could be monitored.
So just to clarify that point, you say that there's a 3-monthly report to the pay board, which obviously includes the trade union representatives. Does that then subsequently find its way through to the Audit and Governance Committee, or could we suggest as a committee, if we wanted to have a review? I think obviously it can come back here, but the Audit and Governance would be the body which is cross-party that might look at sort of how this is working.
I don't know whether it'd be Audit and Governance or it would be here, so I think we'd have to check clarity on where the governance for that review would sit.
I suppose it could come here and then we can refer it to Audit and Governance if we feel that's appropriate. That would be the other way of dealing with it. I'm just conscious, picking up on the comments from the committee, that if we can have sort of a fairly early review once the process is underway, and then given what you've said about payments would be up to a maximum of 12 months, I think like a report in a year back here in a year's time, once the system is put in place, would be appropriate as well, so that we can review whether there are unintended consequences, if you like, of of criteria. I mean, anybody want to wave or something? I mean, I appreciate that there's quite a lot of safeguards you've put in, you know, in terms of the process, the criteria and the evidence, and also, as you've rightly pointed out, the need to monitor it quite carefully in terms of equalities impacts. But I think there needs to be a report back here within, well, obviously not too soon, but at a year's, you know, a year from now would seem to be a sensible point to report back on how this policy is going. So it's like we agree to it being in place for up to a year and then review it. Pete, do you want to?
I think a year's too long. That's sort of the life of the scheme, isn't it? And what the other question that I had really is there an overall budget for it? I don't know if Councillor Ayres is doing the sums on his calculator over there, but you can see that in adult social care, children's services are in crisis. You know, under-resourced. Clearly, we're not able to collect everybody's bins at the moment on a regular basis. You know, you can see across the piece with the funding arrangements that we've got, the council will not be able to deliver all the services it's supposed to deliver. And a lot of that will be around staff retention. So you can see that actually this could just turn into a 10% pay rise for the entire, well, most of the council staff, with, you know, quite a lot of them feeling a bit left out, as Councillor Hook suggests. So, you know, is there an overall budget? At what point do we say that's it?
I don't know if you wish to answer, Trudy, or
So there isn't a central budget pot for this, and the financial implications at point 33 says it'll be met within the service areas to demonstrate kind of within their budgets of how they'll cover the cost.
Councillor Ayres, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I think it will obviously have to be managed within directorate budgets. That's the way everything operates. But when you just put through the hypotheticals, if you're taking that scenario that Trudy mentioned, that you've lost 4 members of staff, at the point you're triggering a 10% payment, then quite clearly you've saved 4 times annual salary. At that point isn't the ideal situation to be in, but you're saving the salary on the actual members of staff that aren't present. So making sure you don't lead anybody any further. But the other knock-on effect of that is certain areas you can't just have vacancies. So social care, for example, this is one of the biggest issues we've got, because social care is still not funded correctly, and I will continue to go on about that in terms of the way the government approach, and national insurance is not the answer to that, but I won't go into that one any further. But the fact you have to backfill those does create a pool of people who are more interested in doing sort of sessional work rather than taking salaried work. So you end up incurring those costs anyway, because if you have the staff vacancies, you then have to get interims in on much higher wages and contracts than you would be if they're actual members of staff. So in terms of being able to retain them, even at 10% higher, is significantly cheaper than getting an agency staff. But as I say, in social work especially, that is progressively difficult, because people can earn twice as much in half the time doing it as sort of a part-time temporary job rather than they would as a full-time member of staff. And that's a national issue with social workers, for example. But that is happening, obviously, across the board as well.
Hey.
So are you confident that the controls are in place to make sure that this doesn't just sort of spiral out of control and essentially end up in a 10% pay rise for all council staff?
Yes.
So, Trudy, do you want to come back on the recommendations I've got on paragraph 2? I think we're suggesting adding something about report back, you know, within a period of time, so that we can see how the policy is working in practice, and if necessary, suggest further measures that we might need to adjust in the light of experience. Is that?
In light of it going to CCNC pay board on a quarterly basis, I'm happy for it to, if you wish it to be on a quarterly basis back here. So you've got that overview initially.
Yeah, I think if we say that sort of initially, and obviously then after 6, maybe once we've had 2 of those, we can then review whether that's the right for us to have it on our agendas, or whether we just have an annual report.
I would just like to add, I mean, as the head of HR, I don't see, and from discussions that we've had at CMT about it, I don't expect it to be significantly used. So I think in terms of everybody getting a 10% pay rise, I don't think it's.
Well, obviously that would provide reassurance to this committee, I suppose, if we can actually have, at least for the first 6 months, have report back. Yeah. Is everyone happy with that as an amendment? Can I see all those in favour of recommendations? Yeah, okay. Thank you. So that's item 5 complete. Thank you. Item 6 is a draft work plan, which is a sort of fairly standard items. Have we got any amendments or additions to it?
I'm hoping that by the 18th of October, so as a result of the public interest report action plan, there's a draft guidance document on the use of payments that's going back to Audit and Governance Committee at the end of this month. If they agree to that document, then we can bring that to the SMU committee on the 18th of October. If not, it'll be the November date. So I haven't added it to it yet. It's dependent upon Audit and Governance at the end of this month.
Right, thank you. With that addition,
December will need the data coming back that we've just been discussing as well, because that'll be 3 months, won't it?
will it be? I mean, do you know what the cycle is for the pay board actual meeting is?
Can I check it, and we
Okay.
can circulate as part of the.
We'll add that once we
Yeah,
know what it
thank
is.
you.
Then. Okay, thank you. Is everyone else happy with the work plan? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So that brings us to item 7 I have is urgent business, and I believe Councillor Kilbane has an item that wishes to raise.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's been brought to my attention that the local plan will probably come back for examination in November. We have 2 senior planning officers who've been working on the local plan who won't be available. So we have one who will be finished on the 31st of October, and we have another who will be going on maternity at the beginning of December. And that means that we are going to have a local plan coming back for examination, and we won't have any senior staff in place to assist with that examination. And I think we need to urgently look at how we are going to resource that process.
Can we note that concern and ask for it to be followed up?
I would flag that. I don't think that's actually urgent business under the Local Government Act. That's actually just making a point in public, but we'll gloss over that. And I also don't think it's appropriate to talk about individual staff members' personal circumstances, but the resourcing of the local plan team is a priority for the administration, and that is being looked at. And we are making sure that a significant amount of additional staff have already been brought into the local plan team on top of that, and all of the issues being managed. And there is no concerns from my point of view as portfolio holder about staffing resources in the local plan team, and nobody's ever brought that to my attention.
Okay, so thank you for that reassurance then, but it's duly noted.
So can I just check? Sorry, Councillor, you're saying nobody's brought this issue to your attention?
You've never brought that to my attention. No member of the council has brought that to my attention. I have
no council officers.
No council.
So
I have
can you-
fortnightly
can you
briefings
speak
with
through
council
the chair,
officers around the
please?
local plan, at which we discuss staffing resources along many other things. We met last week to discuss the local plan.
And nobody's brought it to your attention?
Thank you. Thank
That
you.
there are concerns, no.
Thank you. I think we have noted that and noted the comments from both parties. So at this point, moving to item 8, which is the item regarding redundancy, which we need to take in private session. So can I thank everybody for their contributions and thank the public for attending, and we will conclude the live broadcast so we can have a private conversation on these 2 items, which have been identified for private discussion.